You have been selected and sworn as the jury in the case of the state of Florida versus John Smith. This is a case involving an alleged parking violation. It is your duty to listen to the evidence, apply the law as I give it to you, and decide if the state has proven the violation beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant, John Smith, is charged with a parking violation, specifically parking in a handicapped space without the required permit. The elements that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt are that the defendant parked a vehicle. The vehicle was parked in a space designated for handicapped vehicles. The space was clearly marked with signage indicating it was for handicapped parking only, and the defendant did not have a valid handicapped parking permit displayed on the vehicle at the time of the offense. The term parked means the voluntary stopping or standing of a vehicle, whether occupied or not, other than temporarily, for the purpose of, and while actually engaged in, loading or unloading merchandise or people. A handicapped parking permit refers to a placard or license plate issued by the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles or a similar agency in another jurisdiction, which authorizes the vehicle on which it is displayed to make use of parking spaces reserved for handicapped persons. It is the state's burden to prove each element of the offense beyond doubt that's reasonable. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. It is a doubt that is based on reason and common sense after a careful and impartial consideration of all the evidence in the case. During this trial, you have heard testimony from witnesses and examined physical evidence presented by both the prosecution and the defense. You must consider all the evidence and determine the credibility of each witness. In doing so, you should consider the witness's intelligence, the opportunity of the witness to have seen or heard the evidence about which they testify, the witness's memory, the witness's manner while testifying, any interest, bias, or prejudice the witness may have, and the reasonableness of the witness's testimony in light of all the evidence. Remember, the defendant is presumed to be innocent. This presumption remains with the defendant throughout every stage of the trial and is not overcome unless you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. The state has presented evidence that the defendant's vehicle was parked in a designated handicapped parking space without a permit. The defense has argued that the signage was not visible and that the defendant was not aware that the space was reserved for handicapped parking. It is for you to determine whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the signage was clear and that the defendant knowingly parked in a handicapped space without a permit. If you find that the state has failed to prove any element of the offense, then you must find the defendant not guilty. If you find that the state has proven all the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt, then you should find the defendant guilty. In considering your verdict, you may only consider the evidence that was presented in the courtroom. You must not be influenced by any personal feelings of sympathy or prejudice towards the defendant or the state. Your verdict must be based solely on the evidence and the law. You will be given a verdict form with two options, guilty and not guilty. You must reach a unanimous decision. Once you have reached a verdict, you will return to the courtroom, and the foreperson will present the verdict to the court. In conclusion, the charge against the defendant is a serious matter, and it is your duty to render a true and just verdict based on the evidence. As you debate, remember that the law requires that the state's proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a high standard of proof that society demands, and it reflects the importance we place on individual rights and freedoms. The defendant has no obligation to present evidence or prove anything in defense. While the charge may seem minor compared to other offenses, it is your duty to uphold the law and apply it fairly and impartially. The rules regarding handicapped parking spaces are designed to protect the rights and access of those with disabilities, and it is important that these rules are enforced. You must consider all the evidence presented, the arguments of counsel, and the instructions of the court. It is your collective memory, judgment, and experience that you bring into the deliberation room that must guide you to a unanimous verdict. Once you have reached a verdict, you will notify the bailiff, who will then escort you back into the courtroom. Your verdict will be read in open court and will become a part of the public record of this trial. Please proceed with your deliberations with the seriousness and attention this case deserves. You are the judges.